Well, welcome back, everybody. This is episode 26 of, can you believe it, guys, of the Journey of Integral Recovery podcast. And we have a really exceptionally special show today. But anyway, my name's John Dupuy. This is Dr. Bob Weathers. And this is our co-podcaster and producer, Douglas Prater. And today we have with us Robert Augustus Masters. And even your name is weighty, you know. Augustus, August, Masters, and we've had a couple of conversations before. I don't know if we've ever did it on video, but I've had it on one of my websites. A conversation we had a long time ago that was just brilliant. And well, why don't you read the bio so I don't have to say it in my surreal way.
Robert Augustus Masters, Ph.D., is a relationship expert and psycho-spiritual therapist and trainer with a doctorate in psychology. He is the co-founder with his wife Diane of the Masters Center for Transformation, a school featuring relationally rooted psycho-spiritual work devoted to deep healing and fully embodied awakening. He's also the author of many books, including Transformation Through Intimacy, Spiritual Bypassing, Emotional Intimacy, and To Be a Man, as well as the audio program Knowing Your Shadow. His uniquely integral, intuitive work, which he developed over the past 4 decades, dynamically blends the psychological and physical with the emotional and spiritual, emphasizing full-blooded embodiment and awakening, emotional openness and literacy, deep shadow work, and the development of relational maturity. At essence, his work is about becoming more intimate with all that we are in the service of our deepest possible healing, awakening, and integration. And when we're done with the show, you can visit his website. You definitely should, at robertmasters.com.
That's great.
All right. Well, welcome, Robert.
Thank you.
And let me say, just your whole idea of spiritual bypassing in the book, that hit me. You know, it's one of those books that somebody mentioned in a lecture, and I immediately just resonated to what they were saying, and I went and I ordered it. And I would hold up a copy, but I keep giving it away. You know, it's like, here, you need to read this. So it's one of those books I've bought a number of times. And I do have this book, To Be a Man, which I was honored to do a blurb on, which is like, oh, right. It's like Jesus wants me to do a blurb or something, you know, almost that level. Anyway, so, I've really been paying attention to literature, men's literature, good books about being a man, because I was trying to sort it all out. And I knew kind of what I grew up with, had some good things, but wasn't the whole picture. And so every decade or so, there would be a good book about being a man. And there's not many, books out there. And you go to the women's sections in the bookstore, tons of, women really know about being women pretty well. But this man thing is rather kind of a lofty thing. And anyway, your book is just tremendous. And I think in the theme of recovery, the men, and of course, it's not just men who know what it needs to be a man. Women also need what it needs to know what it means to be a man in a totally grounded and healthy, actualized, realized way. And it's just a real treasure. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out before we started rolling. And anything you'd like to talk about as far as this process of recovery. And by the way, we also feel that the stuff that we're laying out for recovery, people who have substance compulsions or any other kind of, we all basically need to do the same healing work to become the best versions of ourselves, because with addiction or something else, we are all got stuff.
We all have an addict in us.
Absolutely.
There's many levels to it. And back to the book, To Be a Man. I mean, it's written for men, but more and more women are reading it. Then saying to their husbands, I want you to read this. And I'd love to do a book on To Be a Woman, but of course it would be a little arrogant of me to write that directly. So if my wife gets healthy enough, maybe she could write it, and I would be in the background. Because I'm doing women's groups now too, to my surprise. A lot of men's work since the book To Be a Man, 5-day groups 4 or 5 times a year. Really deep work. Subtitle is bringing head, heart, and guts into full-blooded alignment. The full-blooded is really important because it's juicy work. And I've had more and more women want to do work just as with a group of women, and they feel safe with me. So I've been doing those now too, and that's going really well.
I'm glad to hear that.
I
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Robert. Sorry. I was just going to say, when I was a wilderness guide, often I would be guiding or co-guiding groups of young women, who are dealing with addiction and blah, 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 out in the wilderness, these extended journeys. And then we start talking, and almost all of them had been sexually molested or abused by men, and so I was the only man in the circle and going through this stuff. And first of all, I would start weeping, and then I would just get angry, and I would just so apologize. It's like, oh my God, as a man, do you know what it's like to hear this stuff? And I just want to say, that
thank God you weren't numb
to serve. Yeah.
To feel the natural rage and feel the hurt. And it's really important. And there's a lot of safety for men just being with men. There's things we can discuss and explore with women where there would be almost too much for many of them. Same with the women. I've said, would you like to have a few guys in the group? They said, no, we feel better doing this. And when I have trainings that are mixed, inevitably there's some, attractions between men and women. Stuff gets unclean. I get to work with that, but it can be kind of messy. So I'm still doing mixed groups, but less inclined now. It's more labor.
Yeah. That's the way it went in the wilderness thing. We used to do mixed groups, and we finally just ended up, doing, men and women's groups. And then again, there's kind of a richness in the messiness too. So there's a time to separate and a time to come together.
My favorite male-female dynamic is when I do couples work. I love seeing couples fly in to do work with me for 2 days in a row. I love seeing the dynamic and working with it, teasing it apart, getting to the heart of it.
Yeah, and having written this book, what would you say, and I think this is really important for people who are working on themselves, men in this case, or if your husband or your loved ones or your son are working on it, could you kind of encapsulate it? Say as much as you will, but what does it mean to be a healthy man in your eyes and in your wisdom and all the work that you've done?
Well, to have all that we are, be working together, to be functional, to be vulnerable, have spine. There's heart, there's guts, there's a clarity of mind. It all works together in a healthy man. But part of this means facing what's unhealthy in us as men, not thinking, okay, I'm going to be good, I'm being very devotional, I'm monogamous, I do my practices, and meanwhile in the shadows there's stuff festering. There's hidden. Promiscuous urges, pornographic pulls. When I'm working with men, I like to see all that pulled into the open. Once it's in the open, then we can work with it. And to get it in the open, we have to go through the shame that is often there. Men says, I don't want to go near that stuff. I'd rather dissociate, go numb, get aggressive, attack myself in some way. Anything rather than feel the shame around being dysfunctional and screwed up. That's where the healing is. If I meet a guy who says he's really trying hard to be a good husband after being cheating on his wife a number of times, I say to him, I want to meet the you who still has that desire. It's buried in there, somewhere there. Let's meet him. Let's bring him into the open. Let's find out how old he is, what his origins were, the degree of addiction you have to acting out his impulses. And that usually is a great relief for most men. It's embarrassing at first, shameful, hurts, but then, wow, now I can show myself. Now I can heal. Now I can become a safer man for women.
And safer men for men, too.
Exactly. And that's so important. I mean, the safety is crucial. Without the safety, you can't go deep in relationship. You can't be a safe person if you haven't worked on yourself deeply. You don't know your dark. You have to know your dark corners, all of it.
Yeah, there's just no way to get around that, is there? And I love the book, Spiritual Bypassing. And one of the things it's any path, technique, spiritual program, whatever it is, if it avoids or neglects the shadow, does not deal with it, it's going to become a pathology, a cult. And I grew up in the Catholic Church, and the whole thing, and let's just deny femininity, and let's deny sex. Oh, yeah, and let's just put that in the closet. That's worked really well. It's just been,
that's a pulsating closet, isn't it? I mean, there's
God, oh my God. Yeah, and one of the main cardinals in charge of the finances, I mean, the latest revelation this week is he's being called back to Australia for decades of pedophilia. It's like, oh dear,
Yeah. I had an experience yesterday, Robert, that I want to share with you, and I had you in mind, knowing that we'd be meeting today. I meet twice a week with men's groups in a local treatment center. These are men who are addicts early in recovery, typically from heroin or meth, long-term addiction. And as it turned out, well, I came in yesterday with the idea of doing a meditation on self-compassion, and the topic would be self-compassion in relationship to shame. I came into the group, and what was announced at the very beginning is that one of their fellow clients had just overdosed and died in the last 2 days. And though I didn't know this man well, they did. And so there was a part of me that had my neat little self-compassion package all set up. And I basically said, that's not going to happen today. Let's do something different. And they said, what they acknowledge is no one's talking about it. We don't know how to deal with this. And so I said, I don't think there's any formulas for this, but I suspect that talking about it would be better than not talking about it. So for an hour, these men made themselves vulnerable. And their chief vulnerability was this, Robert, and I would love for your comment on this, is one after the other said, I don't know how to feel anything other than anger. That's all I know how to do as a man. And so when you talk about grief or sadness or honoring this man who died, I don't feel anything. And I think what we came to was just acknowledging that was at least a step in the right direction of being naked or vulnerable.
Well, that's it, because when I work with men like that, I want to address fairly early on the numbness that's going on without shaming them. Say, here's numbness. Let's explore it. Let's take our awareness into it. Let's find out when you first were numb as a boy to avoid certain things. What were you avoiding by becoming numb? What was the feeling going on before you became numb? And pretty soon, there's anger for sure. There's also fear and shame. And once we enter into that through expressive work, body work, then things start to crack. Then when the grief comes, and I see this in women and men, it's the same. When the grief comes, it just breaks the heart wide open, and it connects us to everyone. For better or for worse, but it connects us. And so I work with grief a lot. And with men's groups, there's a lot of grief. In women's groups. But to get to it, often the doorway is anger. There's things have happened that have been really atrocious. And I don't just go for quiet anger. I go for the full thing, the full-blooded expression. Because once the person is in that state, then that can mutate into profound vulnerability, openness, grief very quickly. If it stops short of that and remains just merely aggressive, the man or woman stays armored and they stay righteous, but underneath that, there's the person's soul crying out to be seen, and nothing like someone's death to do that. And then we consider our own death, the fact that we're so vulnerable, it's such a short time. I had a heart attack last year. If the ambulance hadn't come in 5 minutes, I wouldn't be here. I was so fortunate. 5 minutes after I had agonizing pain. I knew I was dying. My wife called. The ambulance was there. And every day since then, it's been bonus time. And it softened me incredibly. I mean, I've already had some, but I can be a pretty hard-nosed guy sometimes. It really softened me and continues to do so. And I treat the days that keep coming as bonus time.
That's beautiful.
I've been close to death before many times. I've taken a lot of risks. But this time, this felt like this was it. And there's nothing I could do to save myself. No meditative technique, no surrender. The artery was completely blocked, and I was blacking out from pain. Then an hour later, I'm in bliss because now I can breathe. I'm in the hospital. There's still a lot of pain, but I'm so fucking happy to be here.
Thank you. Robert, I have another question, and it just got evoked by what you were saying, and I was aware of it when we came together today. It's just been in the last bit of time that I've become more familiar with the literature on highly sensitive persons, Elaine Aron's research and so on, and I'm well imagining that you're aware of it. I'm curious about this in relationship to the work I'm doing with men, particularly men coming out of addiction, is that a high proportion, I think a statistically significant number of them, probably would qualify as what she calls high sensitivity. And I just wonder if, in addition to the work that you're doing around anger and around full-blooded, full-bodied wholeness as a male, any thoughts that you have about working with this dimension? And I'll tell you what the thought is that when I first came across this literature, I felt how unfortunate that she would use the term sensitivity. And then that revealed for me the incredible bias negatively, at least in the U.S. and probably in Western culture, is that's the problem, is that using that word itself has a negative connotation.
Exactly.
And we don't need to come up with another word. We need to address the fact that culturally we
marshal. We need to strip sensitivity of any negative connotations.
That's it.
We're all. Yeah. I mean, I'm a highly sensitive guy. I always have been. You know what? I'm getting more sensitive as I evolve. I can be hurt more, but it matters less to me. I don't care because I'm more.
In a masculine way, I'd say, yeah, I lose my shit a lot more often now. And notice I mean, that's a pretty good way of putting it. You know, I'm losing my shit. But in a military thing, I was a soldier. You're losing your shit's not good, you know. But in a therapeutic sense, losing our shit and getting to the heart of the depth of our heart is exactly.
And the more sensitive you are, the easier the process is. As long as you have some grounding, some degree of center, then you're sensitive. Like when I'm really leading a group, my radar is on super high. I'm very sensitive. I'm picking up so much stuff. But I don't feel overwhelmed by my sensitivity. It's more like it just helps me see more clearly, keeps me more attuned in my relationship with my wife, etc. And it's to me, I'm glad I have that. I suffered from it as a young boy. I was so sensitive. I got hurt too easily. I had no resources to deal with it. But now it's a gift. And I wish for all men to be just as sensitive as women, maybe even more. Just to not think, okay, my job is to be a man. You know, being a man means in part being sensitive. Even though we have a spine, we have guts, we can take strong stands. We're sensitive. Yeah. And I've seen some guys who are so armored, and I have not met a man yet who's not really sensitive. I strip away the outer part.
Yeah.
Cut through the defenses. A lot of men who seem insensitive are just so armored. You cut through the armoring. Yeah. There it is. There's that tender heart. There's that little boy inside who's being ignored or starved in some way.
Yeah, part of that for me, Robert, as a person with a fair bit of sensitivity myself, has been an allergy to anger due to some things growing up. And I wondered if maybe you could speak into that a little bit, the opposite pole of being so frightened by anger that we're not able to own our own, and where the balance is and how to help it.
The boy in you is going to continue to be probably afraid of aggression, which I'm sure you receive more aggression than anger. I distinguish them quite. Aggression is heartless, on the attack. Real anger is an inherently vulnerable emotion. But if you had a negative association with any degree of anger, aggression as a boy, it's scarier as an adult to get into it. But part of the work is to connect more with the boy in you. So you're doing two things at once. One is you're loving him. You're connected to him. You feel him. Two is you're protecting him. You're if need be, you can be very fierce. And then you're doing it for a boy who can't fight back. And when you do that, you step into your manhood more, where you're holding the boy. You're taking a stand. You're angry, and you're learning how to be angry in a clean way, which means you don't blame, shame. And there's some degree of heart. So if you're pissed at me, it would work if I can feel you still care about me, even though you're angry at me. You can be heated, red-faced, but I can tell if you're caring or not. If you're not caring, I'm going to protect myself. If you're caring, it's a very different thing. And I think anger's gotten a bad rap in many circles, especially spiritually. In fact, in a lot of Buddhist texts, the word for anger is conflated with the terms for aggression, ill will, and hatred, like it's all the same thing. So I've taken great pains in my work to bring anger out of the closet and say, hey, we need more anger. I mean, healthy anger. I mean, aggression has to be converted back into anger. And when I'm angry, it keeps my relationship fields clean and clear. It keeps me vulnerable. I've learned to be angry in a way where my heart's involved more and more. And if I'm working with you, we're going to go back into your history to where you first became frightened, for good reason probably, and to start to work that through. Once that's worked through, you'll be able to take more stands as a man and start to be glad that you have your anger on tap. It's a resource. Moral fire.
Yeah. Recently, I have a friend, you might know her, Judith Orloff. She's written quite a few books about this, and she just wrote this book, survival book for the empathetic, or for the sensitive, another way the way we're talking about it. And a lot of it's just how to protect yourself if you're this super sensitive person, and how not to hang out with toxic people too much, and this and that and the other. And of course, when we were talking, and I asked, well, what about the gifts of it? And she didn't ever really get to that part of it, but you're really beginning to touch on that, you know, as taking the sensitivity as being vulnerable, and being, people can take advantage.
We can be very empathetic with someone. who's actually really good for us, who's a good person, but we fuse with them. We get lost in their emotional reality. So when I'm training therapists, one thing I teach them is what I call lucid empathy, by which I mean being really empathetic, really connected with who you're working with, in close, where you can be touched deeply, but keeping just enough distance, keep it in focus, and having what I call an empathic shield in place. It's like if you have a child and the child's young and is really hurt, your heart goes out to the child. You keep just enough distance from the pain so you can call 911, do first aid. That's intimacy. Empathy alone can be a problem because we can fuse with other people's states and lose touch with our own integrity and our own boundaries. But without empathy, there's no compassion. So it's an incredible thing to cultivate along with boundaries. An empathic person doesn't have boundaries is in trouble.
Yeah, they certainly are. You want to say a little more about healthy anger? I like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm a passionate guy, and I'm awful. Maybe a lot of my anger has not been healthy, but I certainly can get angry at injustice and
well, thank God
things
for that.
around me.
I think it's important to have that moral outrage and to not just go, well, there's some bad news. What's happening in sports right now? To stay with it. I think there's things that are important to be angry about, and healthy anger to me doesn't shame the other, doesn't put them down, but it certainly addresses, it underlines things emphatically. So if I'm angry at you and we're friends, I might be very heated, forceful, penetrating, but I haven't forgotten that I care about you. I may not show in my face, but you can feel it from me. In other words, I'm safe.
Absolutely right.
I'm safe, and then you can open to what I'm doing. You can receive the anger. If there's any aggression, any attack, any righteousness, any putting down of John, you're probably going to feel a little like, I don't know about this. You're going to sidestep me, push back. You're not going to let me in as much. So healthy anger always has some degree of heart. Unhealthy anger, there's no heart. And you know what? Unhealthy anger, aggression, we dehumanize the other. And then we get into things like, the extreme ethnic cleansing, dehumanization. It's them, a dark, distant them. And
if there's that real loving and really, the person knows that you care about them, then you can get angry, and it's just like, it's not pleasant, but oh my God, this is a lot of love that's coming at me. It's a lot of caring.
As long as you don't overdo the caring part, because then that can camouflage the anger. You're trying so hard to be nice and show that you care about your anger gets left out. You want to be able to have some people in your life you can cut loose with like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was at a conference with the Jungian analyst James Hillman, and he was addressing depression. And he said, we Westerners, we get enraged, and then that sense of being enraged turns into an interior process, and we become depressed. And he says, far better to be outraged. And then he went on to talk about that. You remind me of him, Robert, as you're talking about this, that there are plenty of things that are outrageous, and the proper response is outrage.
As opposed to enrage.
Opposed to enrage,
That's good.
Yeah, to let it come out. Yeah. And then the work then is to be responsible in how we cut loose.
Yes.
Not to just say, okay, I'm just being angry, it's like anything that means whatever I'm doing is fine, should be accepted. No, we have a responsibility to how we channel it, how we deliver it. Yeah. I
so love your languaging of it, Robert, around anger has heart. Just every time that you speak that, and I've read your book where you discuss these various ways of looking at anger, aggression, and violence. And it's that introduction of heart. It's, I don't know, for me as a young boy growing into manhood, I think heart got left out of the equation for the most part.
I think for most of us.
Yeah.
Anger and love can coexist.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful.
Oh, all the time. One of my passions that I picked up in the last few years is I play blues guitar and I sing the blues. And I'm a depressive man. I've written about it, talked about it. It almost killed me. And and so it's like so many times I've been to the place where the death holds no fear, because when you're in that much suffering, it's like non-existent sounds like a really nice option. And thank God, through your work, through the work that I started trying to teach others to do, it's like, oh my God, I'm working on myself here. But I found sometimes when I just get down, when I listen to the news or, blah, 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 my own failings of not being enough or what I think I should, whatever my ego wants to beat me up about, I'll go and I'll start playing some Peter Green, like there's a song, I've got a mind not to live anymore, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I find that just getting into that and, translating through my lips and through my voice and stuff like that, it really just, it makes it human. It brings it out. And somehow transmutes that, and then I connect with, you think you're the only guy suffering on the planet like this right now? It's like, oh, welcome to the family. Then it kind of spreads out, and it turns into kind of a warmth and a love and a connectedness and a humility and a deepness, I think.
Yeah, and also I hear in what you're saying a need to be really clear about your inner critic. So your inner critic does not have a field day with you. Doesn't get to nail John for not being straighter than he thinks he should be or being perfect. And that part of our psyche is not dealt with. And it gets connected up with the child in us. We're going down the tubes. That's inherently depressing. You're literally being pressed down.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Robert, this may be too broad of a topic, or maybe would be something brilliant, but what I would love, and I think maybe our audience would love, is if you have a recommendation for a practice we could do every day to start to get in touch with maybe some of the things that are hidden within us that need to be healed, and then how to heal them.
Well, there's a couple practices. One is having a conscious rant. That means in a clearly perimetered space where there's no danger of hurting anyone, you stand up, you start to let yourself shake. You bring to mind whatever it is that's overwhelming you, hurting you, you're in despair about, you're angry about, and you cut loose for long as you can. Usually it lasts, I never see it go beyond a minute for most people. You go over the top with it. You discharge that energy. That's not a solution to our woes, but it's part of keeping ourselves cleaner energetically. A more central practice or coexisting practice would be to deepen your work on your shadow. Get to know what's in there. So it's not just this arcane concept of considering archetypes. You're going into, here's the conditioning of mind that's still not illuminated or not illuminated fully. What is it? And you can see that by looking at your early history where you split off, push certain things into the shadow out of survival. Yeah. That's a great practice. And to ideally put yourself in the hands of someone who can work with shadow really skillfully, because just on our own we can go so far, but if you're with a really good psychotherapist or another type of therapist who knows shadow work inside out, that can make a huge difference. And that means cutting through the shame that says I should be able to do this on my own. Why should I need someone else? Yeah. Exactly.
And this stuff has to be anchored in the body too, right? I hear you talking about that. It's to be full bodied. It can't just be an intellectual process where you're aware of it.
Well, it's a highly emotional process. And see, emotion, people often think emotion just means feeling. To me, emotion is more than feeling. Emotion includes feeling, cognition, social factors, your conditioning. It's all mixed together. It's very complex. So when you work with emotion, you're working with a lot more than just feeling. And if you go into that, you have to enter the body. You have to work with the body and get into your guts, get into where the wounds are. The jaw, small of the back, the feet. I do body work with everyone I work with, hands-on, intuitive, connecting it with emotional direction at the same time, because I find our body contains it all. I mean, your history, my history is all, we've embodied it. Sure. Even the stuff we can't remember, it's still there. I mean, we don't remember our births in a narrative sense, but somatically, the part of the brain that registers emotion is mature at birth. So we can recall emotionally, somatically, viscerally, our birth. I have, and a bit earlier, last trimester, our first months, it's all sitting there in our body. And so much therapy bypasses the body, doesn't include it, or looks at it spiritually as just a container for who we really are. So it's a devaluing of the body.
Right.
The body needs to be honored. I mean, especially as we age and it starts to creak and groan a little more, it's calling for more attention.
It's a story I've shared before, but you just reminded me of it, Robert. I had seen a therapist for a number of years, and for whatever reason, one day I was walking down the outside walkway to his office, and he was standing out there on the balcony, and he watched me walk towards him. We walked inside of his office, and Don said to me, Bob, in all of these years of work, I've never seen you walk. And from there we riffed on that in terms of all the embodied things that he didn't know about me. We just made a list there, and I appreciated so much his humility, but it was acknowledging that if we just limit it to what's above the shoulders here on the head, look at all that we miss.
Or to look how you walk, which shoulder's higher, or you more weight more on your heels, like a good rolfer will look at your body.
Yes.
There's that sense of really, I mean, I get body work every week from rolfers, other therapists. I like to have my body worked on. I already know my body well, but it feels lovely to have someone go into my body and I can take my awareness in there and go, here's this vehicle, this aging vehicle is still somehow functioning. And I love that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Bob, I want to bounce this one off you. This is something I've written about and experienced and taught, is that, we have the dark shadows, right? All the stuff that happened to us, God knows. Sometimes it could be generational, cultural, all kinds of stuff down there to work on. But what about the light shadows? What about those good things that are residing in our souls as maybe potentiality?
That's one of the benefits of doing deep shadow work. If you're going into your shadow deeply, you're going to come across the bigness and the beauty that you may have stored there, shoved away there. So that happens too. I've had people do the most traumatic, painful work, and suddenly they're awake spiritually. Not that that was the goal. They sit up out of the trauma, the emotional work, and they have a clear sense of who and what they are. Maybe it just lasts a story for a short time. And that's because they've opened so deeply that the essential self can show up. It can move through.
And also can essential gifts. In other words, if you have this vocation of calling you a musician, a writer, a therapist, a teacher, a healer, a parent, whatever it is, and that is never expressed. Somehow you were blocked by outside circumstances or blocked by your own interjected messages about what you can and can't do. Yeah. I found that in my place, that was a big part of my own suffering. And there's this great quote from the Gospel of Thomas, and I probably misquote, but I'll paraphrase, that Jesus said. He said that if you keep that which inside of you, it will kill you. But if you bring it forth, it will bring you life. And I've interpreted that. I mean, that could be the dark shadow too, but as the gifts that we have to give back to the world, to our planet, to our family, to our brothers and sisters. If we keep that, it'll fester inside of it.
Well, that's when people ask me what my path is. I say my path is to be intimate with all that I am, everything, high and low, dark and light, beautiful and ugly, whatever, just to be intimate with all of it.
Brilliant.
So the true size is there, and also our smallness, our darkness, our selfishness, our greed, it's all there. It's all there. And it's all there to be looked at, known, and related to. And the peak of relationship for me is intimacy, to be intimate with it. Just imagine if, say, you had lived a more shut down life and you've never done music. You'd be a very different man now. If that urge, that natural pull towards music had never emerged and was kept in the shadows, you would have suffered a lot from that.
All three of us get really quiet when you say that, Robert. All three of us are lifelong musicians.
Well, it's like I love writing. If no one ever read me ever again, I'd still write. And I did. Yes. I did poetry as a very young boy, and then I got shut down through my teens, my 20s, and I rediscovered poetry in my 20s. But it came out of me, it bubbled out of me in the most unusual way, and I couldn't stop it. It was in my blood. Yeah. And the way I work, same thing. It wasn't like I thought being a therapist would be a good idea. I just started working with people for free in the 70s, mid-70s. And by 78, I thought, maybe I'll hang up my shingle. And, of course, it worked. But it was in my blood to do that. Yeah. It was natural, just like others. Music's in there. Like my wife's been doing music since she was a tiny girl. She can't help but be completely devoted to musical expression. It's her passion. I don't share that. I share different ones, but it's like those gifts have to be brought forward, and shadow work allows those to be brought forward, and people often aren't aware of that.
Yeah, and for those that are listening, or maybe the whole idea of shadow work is something new, can you give us what is Robert Augustus Masters' definition? A guy who has mastered perhaps a shadow work. What would you say, for somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about?
Well, first of all, shadow to me means that dimension of us where we store, usually unknowingly, what we've disowned in ourselves, rejected in ourselves, don't like about ourselves, etc. Things we say about so many words. That's not me. That's not me. That's shadow. But it's not. But what's even more central, shadow to me, is our unilluminated, not yet, how can I put it, explored conditioning. It's a very deep thing. It's not just this little sideline pursuit. It's very central. It's all our conditioning we don't know yet, haven't faced yet. And shadow work, in the best sense, means moving toward that stuff, getting to know it, relating to it skillfully, integrating it. That's a huge undertaking. And that's personal. Once you do that for a while, you start to become aware of collective shadow.
Thank you.
And that's a huge thing, to become aware of collective shadow. And to be aware of how that's impacting us. And to make shadow work an adventure that brings out the best in us. It brings out our courage, because it requires that you turn toward your pain, your suffering, your discomfort, and start to slowly but surely enter it and explore it. And that you can't do just intellectually. It's an emotional, visceral, somatic journey. And then eventually, entering your pain deeply enough, you emerge from it. There's still more pain, but you have a different relationship to pain.
Yeah.
You can't emerge from it if you haven't already entered it.
Yeah.
And to enter it, you have to face it. That's the big step. The major step is when you turn toward the painful and choose to go toward it. Oh, there's the addict in me. There's the critic. There's the boy. There's my greed. There's my lust. There's my true self. It's all there. It's a storehouse. And I think an awakening that doesn't include deep knowledge of one's shadow it's going to be always a partial awakening.
Yeah. And the shadow can take that part of the awakening that may be real and twist it in all kinds of weird ways. The unconscious part that you haven't dealt with comes back and bites you in the butt and can destroy everything you're trying to do in the world.
Exactly.
Culty, weird, so many ways to spin that one.
I think for myself, how I meditated straight through my addiction. I was like the most mindful addict on the planet.
Did that change your addiction?
A story comes to mind. Back in the 80s, I first came across spiritual bypassing in John Wellwood. I was in graduate school. And I was also simultaneously in the early 80s beginning to practice Zen meditation. And I realized at some point as I was reading him and contemplating it, that I was using meditation as a way of bypassing what was going on in my marriage. And I actually made a vow to myself. I needed to stop meditating for a period of time in order to address what was necessary. And it seemed very un-Buddhist of me to do that, but I did do that. And I did address what was going on in my marriage, and then continued on my merry way back into meditation. It wasn't until a decade later that I became acquainted with substance abuse and addiction. And I think it was a very similar process for me. My meditation somehow kept that in quiescence in terms of the dissonance of that. And it eventually needed to kind of explode or implode or whatever on itself for that to get cleared out. And then once again in my life, return back to the mindfulness practice. So I think that for me, if you look up spiritual bypassing in Wikipedia, I'm not sure that maybe my picture shows up there or something like that, because I've really lived it. Feel so intimately related to what you've written about, Robert. And
it's quite a journey, isn't it? It's a journey of deep healing, awakening, integration, and more often than not, it brings us to our knees.
Yes,
we get humbled in a really good way.
Yeah.
And everyone's got addictions. It's like, how am I dealing with the addict inside? Am I shaming myself for that? Am I bringing compassion to it? What kind of compassion am I bringing to it? And I found it most useful to personify the addict within as a young child. So there's more, my heart opens more very quickly. Here's the me who still can be hooked. And what am I doing with him? I'm holding him. I'm protecting him. I'm helping him, setting boundaries for him.
I just had a thought. You asked a question a couple of minutes ago, and I'm sometimes slow to respond. Is it the way the mindfulness has informed my own relationship to the addict within has been a lesson in contrast, because I've done a lot of work in the 12-step support group settings and so on, but it's easy to demonize the addict within. And I felt intuitively that that's not the direction for me to go. And so in the spirit of what you're saying, there's much more of a conversation ongoing these days, these years, with the addict and all the other personalities within, in a much more gracious way than simply just marginalizing, excising. Let's just surgically remove the addict from within. It doesn't go that way. At least it doesn't go that way for me.
Here's all these occupants of our shadow.
Yeah,
the work is to say, invite them into your living room. A difficult guest is still a guest.
Yes.
Handle with care. Have your boundaries up. Mm-hmm. Don't keep them outside. I mean, you want to know them. You want to see them. Yeah. And there's a joy in that, and there's a sense of there's actually a safety being created. Like I'm not going to act out this stuff because I know it so well. I'm not saying got to keep it down. It's more like I'm intimate with this part of myself that's greedy or selfish. When it kicks in, I can name it with some humor, some compassion.
That's right.
If I can't, my wife can point it out to me. She's so tuned into me. She'll see right through me, and we share a mutual transparency. So.
Yeah, that part that I mentioned, that I'm not good enough and all of this kind of stuff, at this point it's become rather humorous. It's like, you're kidding, right?
Yeah.
You expect John Dupuy to be perfect, and you want me to buy into that?
Did you say the same thing to John Dupuy last week and the week before? I heard this 1,000 times.
It's like, come on, man. You've got to be kidding. So it's there, but it begins to lose its charge to hurt you as you learn to accept it and go, oh, well, that's mine. It's like Ram Dass said, I've never lost a single perversion, right? He just kind of came into a more manageable relationship with it.
It takes a tremendous amount of courage to be so vulnerable and so intimate, with others, of course, but even with oneself. And I wonder where we can draw from to build that courage, to tap into that courage, to confront some of these elements of ourselves and share them with the world.
Here's a good place to start, is to have a vow to turn toward your own pain, and start with the small pains, the things that are not a big deal to you, but they get to you somewhat. Practice turning your attention towards those things. And that's a major step. That just if you can do that, that will cause a real shift in you at many levels, to face what's there. So there you are, you're with a partner, you've said something that's kind of painful, and suddenly you just really, you suddenly get vulnerable. You feel your shame over what you've done. Instead of turning your shame into aggression or withdrawal, you sit in the fire of it. You just sit there with it. You turn toward it. And what this does, it brings out the warrior in us. It takes courage. So when you feel that, you feel your courage deepening, it's an impetus to keep going. Okay, next time something comes into my life that seems painful or difficult, I'm going to face it. I get more data from this situation when I do that. I feel more plugged in. I'm more rooted, grounded, and start with the small stuff. Then when the big stuff comes along, you'll be more prepared.
Yeah, and when you continually do that, you begin to trust the process more. Yeah. And one of the secret handshake in integral recovery is, when we first start with house practice, we check in, and Doug asked me that earlier today, and I was like, was really painful. I went through a lot of stuff, and I just poured it out there, and this is shit I can't fix, God. So I'm just going to be here. And anytime you want to, transmute it, take it away or anything, it's all good by me. In the meantime, we have to carry on. And I just poured it out. But in the end, I just felt kind of emptied and humbled, and okay, I am human.
And then it shifts from, oh my God, such shit, it shifts to holy shit.
Yeah, right.
Here we are. It's still shit, but you know what? I'm here, I'm alive, and I have the capacity to turn at least some of it into compost. And the stuff I can't, I'll put up with the smell, I'll put up with what it reminds me of. And I'm not going to put myself down because that's there, because this is part of my makeup as a human being.
Yeah.
One time, I've told this story before, but I was like, I just couldn't get rid of this particular resentment or whatever it was, anger about the situation or person. And I was like, God, how can you possibly even use me? I'm just so fucked up. And he was like, The answer that came back was very, like a second person thing with God talking to me. He said, well, John, I am God. I can probably work around it. I was like, okay. Thank you.
By the way, so can you.
Yeah, this is, I'm you having a fucked up experience. It's like, okay.
Robert, I wanted to just say this in acknowledgement. I know that you know this, but it's so patently obvious, your compassion towards yourself and towards us, and you just radiated. I just want to bow and honor that in you, Robert. You're an incredible ambassador of what you speak. Your every comment today, your every statement embodies what it is that you're all about. Really honor that in you.
Thank you. And I'm really enjoying being with the three of you. It's such an easy, flowing conversation. Like we could be sitting around somewhere else having the same sort of discussion. This is how I talk with the guys in the men's work too. So if one guy needs some work, we dive in deep. Everyone becomes a safe environment for it. Yeah. And everyone sitting here has suffered, and we're talking about our suffering and working through that, working with it. And it has some, there's humor in it, isn't there? There's a pleasure in saying,
oh, absolutely.
Talk about this stuff. Yeah, I had a shitty day. Here I am. I mean, it's like, it doesn't mean, I can't show that.
Anything that, obviously people can go to your website to find out more about your work, to go to workshops, get all your books. Do you have a book of published poetry, by the way?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's on Kindle.
Yeah, we're big poetry fans here.
It's called Until Our Song is Fully Sung.
What a beautiful title.
You could have just stuck with the title and not written anything else, and that would be enough. It's the shortest book ever, but dude, it's deep.
And I try and work poetry into all my writings, and the editors are always trying to cut it back, and I put in as much as I can.
Good for you.
I'll say, this paragraph maybe seems too poetic to you, but I like saying it poetically.
Yes.
I can transmit a little more than just using ordinary prose. Prose tends to march. Poetry can dance.
Yeah. So,
and I began as writing poetry when I started writing in my 20s. My first love. And of course, the music I've done with my wife, Diane, we have... it's my lyrics, her singing, her arrangement, and I love doing that too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Any words of advice to artists looking to lean into the vulnerability of honest creation?
Get into it fully. Dive into it. Even if it hurts, don't take the hurt as a sign you shouldn't proceed. Just keep going, and have comrades along the way if possible. Support. Yeah. So you can compassionately kick your own ass.
Wonderful.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robert. Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you everybody listening to this. And this is, if there's a anyway, Robert, you're just one of the heroes, and you're kind of one of my Eric Claptons or Stevie Ray Vaughns of inner work. The way I honor these guys in my guitar playing, so you're always there, and not only that, but some of these things I discovered on my own, but to have you reconfirm it so eloquently. Oh, I'm not psychotic. This is something that's real, and to validate my own process and going through all this stuff has been such a huge gift to me, and I really appreciate it.